The air inside the packed federal courtroom was thick with tension. Every seat was filled, and the media lined the back wall, their cameras rolling. This was no ordinary case. The Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, was personally arguing before the court, a rare and historic moment. The case? A massive corruption scandal that had rocked Washington, involving high-ranking officials and foreign interference. Bondi, known for her sharp legal mind and no-nonsense approach, had built a rock-solid case. But the defense was powerful, and the judge presiding over the case, Judge Malcolm Reynolds, was known for his unpredictable temperament. As Bondi stood before the court, outlining the charges in meticulous detail, she noticed something odd. Judge Reynolds was smirking. First, she ignored it. Maybe it was just his way of appearing disinterested. But then, as she continued, his attitude became impossible to overlook. He leaned back in his chair, twirling a pen between his fingers, and then, out of nowhere, he interrupted her. "Ms. Bondi," the judge drawled, his voice dripping with condescension, "I have to say, I'm impressed. Not with your argument, of course, but with your ability to stand here and pretend this case is anything but a political circus." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Bondi's eyes narrowed. "Your Honor, I'm here to present facts, not engage in theatrics," she replied, her voice calm but firm. Reynolds chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, come now, Madam Attorney General. We all know why you're here. This is nothing more than a PR stunt. An attempt to boost your image while your administration crumbles around you." The courtroom gasped. Even the defense attorneys looked uneasy. A federal judge had just insulted the Attorney General of the United States on record. Bondi took a step forward, unshaken. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I find it highly inappropriate for you to make such remarks in a court of law. This case is about justice, not politics." Judge Reynolds scoffed. "Justice? Please, justice is whatever the people in power decide it is. And right now, I'm the one in this courtroom with the power." That was it. A line had been crossed. Bondi met his gaze with steely determination. "Let the record reflect that the presiding judge has just admitted to bias against the prosecution," she stated, her voice echoing through the courtroom. Judge Reynolds' smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. But then he laughed. "Oh, Ms. Bondi, you're adorable when you try to act tough." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. A federal judge had just insulted the Attorney General of the United States, live on camera. But Pam Bondi wasn't one to be underestimated. She straightened her blazer, then turned toward her team. "Prepare to file an immediate motion," she said, her voice unwavering. "Motion for what?" Reynolds sneered. Pam Bondi turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "For your arrest, Your Honor." The entire courtroom erupted. The courtroom was in complete chaos. Gasps, whispers, and even a few stunned exclamations filled the air. A sitting federal judge, arrested? In his own courtroom? No one had ever seen anything like this before. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, his smirk gone. His eyes burned with disbelief and growing anger. "You're joking," he said, his voice quieter but laced with fury. Pam Bondi didn't flinch. She turned to her chief prosecutor, David Lancaster, who had been sitting just behind her at the prosecution's table. "David, file the motion. Now," she ordered. Judge Reynolds shot up from his chair. "Ms. Bondi, you are out of line," he barked. "You think you can have me arrested? In my own courtroom." Bondi calmly reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. She held it up for all to see. "This case isn't just about corruption," she stated, her voice clear and unwavering. "It's about abuse of power. And as it turns out, Your Honor, you've been at the center of it for quite some time." Reynolds froze. Bondi handed the folder to the lead U.S. Marshal, who had been standing at the side of the courtroom. He opened it, his eyes scanning the documents inside. A moment later, he nodded and turned toward his fellow marshals. "Proceed," he ordered. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as two armed marshals stepped forward, their hands resting near their holsters. Judge Reynolds' face turned a deep shade of red. "This is an outrage," he roared. You have no authority to do this. Bondi crossed her arms. Actually, I do. Under Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 242, any judge who abuses their power to obstruct justice is subject to criminal prosecution. And as of this moment, Your Honor, you are under federal investigation. The cameras were still rolling. Across the country, millions of Americans watched as a sitting judge was being confronted with allegations of corruption. Live, in real time, Reynolds clenched his fists, looking around for support. But even the defense attorneys remained silent. No one was going to step in to save him now. The marshals moved closer. Judge Malcolm Reynolds, the lead marshal said, "You are hereby detained pending further investigation. You are advised to remain calm and comply." Reynolds scoffed. "This is absurd. I won't be intimidated by a glorified politician," he spat, glaring at Bondi. "I'll have you disbarred for this." Pam Bondi smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You can try," she said, "but you might want to focus on your own legal defense first." The marshals reached for him. Reynolds instinctively took a step back, his chair scraping loudly against the polished wood floor. "Don't touch me," he barked. One of the marshals placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sir, you need to come with us." Then, in a moment that would be replayed millions of times across social media, Judge Malcolm Reynolds, one of the most powerful men in the judiciary, was forcibly escorted from his own courtroom. The last thing America saw before the cameras cut out was Pam Bondi, standing tall, watching as the judge who had insulted her was taken away in handcuffs. News channels exploded. Social media was on fire. Hashtag Judge Reynolds arrested, hashtag Pam Bondi strikes back, hashtag justice served. The White House issued a rare late-night statement, commending Bondi for her unwavering commitment to justice. The Department of Justice confirmed that an official probe into Reynolds had been ongoing for weeks. Bondi's team had gathered extensive evidence linking him to bribery, obstruction of justice, and collusion with powerful criminal enterprises. This was no political stunt. This was real. As for Reynolds, he was taken into federal custody for questioning. His legal team scrambled to contain the damage, but the court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. Pam Bondi wasn't just a prosecutor. She was a force to be reckoned with. As Judge Malcolm Reynolds was escorted out of the courtroom, the weight of the moment settled over the stunned audience. The media scrambled to report the unfolding drama, and political commentators debated the unprecedented event. But behind the scenes, Pam Bondi was already 10 steps ahead. Within hours of Reynolds' detention, the Justice Department released a statement. Federal Judge Malcolm Reynolds is under investigation for corruption, obstruction of justice, and misconduct. Additional charges may be forthcoming. Bondi sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of files and evidence that had taken months to gather. The corruption network tied to Reynolds was bigger than anyone had anticipated. He had been manipulating cases, suppressing evidence, and taking bribes to protect criminal enterprises. The implications were staggering. Reynolds wasn't just corrupt. He had been shielding powerful political figures, corporate giants, and even foreign operatives. And now he was exposed. The next morning, as Bondi prepared for a press briefing, she received an urgent message from her aide. "You need to see this." She turned on the news. A video statement from Judge Reynolds had just been released. His lawyers had wasted no time launching a counterattack. "What happened in my courtroom yesterday was a disgrace," Reynolds declared, his expression a mix of fury and defiance. "Pam Bondi has abused her power, turned the justice system into a political weapon, and orchestrated a personal vendetta against me. I will fight these baseless allegations and prove that this was nothing more than a stunt to silence me." Bondi exhaled slowly. This wasn't unexpected. Reynolds wasn't the type to go down quietly. The media erupted. Some outlets questioned whether Bondi's move had been too aggressive. Political analysts speculated about the ramifications for the Trump administration. Reynolds' supporters called it a witch hunt. But then the FBI dropped a bombshell. At noon, federal agents raided Reynolds' office and home. Within hours, leaked documents surfaced, confirming that the judge had been under surveillance for months. And the most damning piece of evidence? A wiretap recording. At exactly 6:45 p.m. that evening, the Justice Department played the audio for the world to hear. Reynolds' voice crackled over the speakers. "I don't care what the law says. If Bondi thinks she's going to bring this case forward, she's got another thing coming. I have the power to bury it, and her." A second voice asked, "What if she pushes back?" Reynolds laughed. "Then I'll humiliate her, right in front of the world." Silence. Then the recording ended. The reaction was instantaneous. The media flipped overnight. Those who had defended Reynolds scrambled to backpedal. Legal experts confirmed that the recording was undeniable proof of judicial corruption. Pam Bondi had been right all along. And now, even Reynolds' most powerful allies were abandoning him. The fallout from the wiretap revelation was immediate and devastating for Judge Malcolm Reynolds. News stations ran the recording on repeat. Legal analysts dissected every word, and social media erupted. Even those who had defended Reynolds just 24 hours earlier were now distancing themselves. "I don't care what the law says. I have the power to bury it, and her." It was the moment America realized this wasn't just a courtroom dispute. This was a corrupt judge caught in the act. The Department of Justice wasted no time. That evening, formal charges were announced. Pam Bondi stood before the cameras, poised and confident. "This case is no longer about just one man," she declared. "It's about ensuring that our judicial system remains untouchable by corruption. No one is above the law, not even a federal judge." Then she read the official indictment against Malcolm Reynolds. Bribery, accepting financial payments to alter case rulings. Obstruction of justice, intentionally delaying and suppressing investigations. Abuse of power, using his position to intimidate officials and manipulate legal outcomes. Conspiracy, colluding with high-profile criminals and corporate entities to fix trials. The maximum penalty? Life in federal prison. Reporters fired off questions, but Bondi remained focused. "This is only the beginning," she said. "There will be more arrests." Behind the scenes, federal agents were already moving. The Reynolds investigation had uncovered a massive network of corruption stretching across Washington. Judges, lobbyists, CEOs, politicians, and Reynolds was at the center of it all. That night, FBI agents raided several high-profile law firms and political offices. More names were emerging. Secret bank transfers, offshore accounts, and suspicious legal rulings were exposed. The swamp was being drained, and Pam Bondi was leading the charge. 2 days after his arrest, Judge Reynolds made a desperate move. His attorneys requested a plea deal. He was willing to flip. Facing a lifetime behind bars, Reynolds agreed to testify against some of the most powerful figures in Washington. This wasn't just a court case anymore. It was a political earthquake. Across America, millions watched in shock. Polls showed overwhelming support for Bondi's actions. 89% of Americans believed she was right to take down Reynolds. 77% demanded further investigations into judicial corruption. 92% called for harsher penalties for corrupt officials. The president addressed the nation, declaring a war on corruption. "Pam Bondi has proven that no one is untouchable," he stated. "Justice will be served." Meanwhile, Bondi remained focused. "This isn't about politics," she told reporters. "It's about protecting the integrity of our legal system." She was just getting started. Judge Malcolm Reynolds sat in a high-security federal detention center, his once proud arrogance replaced with cold, hard fear. He had spent decades ruling over others, deciding their fates with the stroke of a pen. Now, his own fate was being decided. His plea deal had been accepted on one condition. He had to name every single official, businessman, and power player involved in his corrupt empire. And so, under the watchful eyes of federal prosecutors, Reynolds flipped. What followed was one of the biggest legal firestorms in U.S. history. 6 federal judges were arrested for corruption and bribery. Several senators and congressmen were exposed for backroom deals. Corporate executives who had used Reynolds to manipulate the legal system faced indictments. The Reynolds investigation became the largest judicial corruption case in American history. And the woman who started it all? Pam Bondi. Her fearless pursuit of justice turned her into a national icon. Some called her a hero, others a relentless warrior against corruption. But she wasn't done yet. As part of his plea deal, Reynolds testified in open court, detailing years of judicial misconduct. His words shook the country. I accepted bribes. I manipulated trials. I used my position to protect the guilty and punish the innocent. I failed the American people. His voice trembled. And I am ashamed. The courtroom was silent. For the first time, Reynolds looked truly defeated. And then the judge delivered the final verdict. Life in federal prison. The once powerful Judge Malcolm Reynolds, now just another prisoner in an orange jumpsuit. Justice had been served. In the aftermath, Bondi's name became legendary. New anti-corruption laws were passed to prevent another scandal like Reynolds. Trust in the justice system began to rebuild. Public officials realized that no one was untouchable. As Bondi walked out of the courthouse after Reynolds' sentencing, a reporter shouted, "What's next for you?" She smiled. More justice. The fight wasn't over. But America knew one thing for sure. Pam Bondi wasn't backing down.